we have a special opportunity for all you listeners. We have in our possession a copy of On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness, Book 1 of Andrew Peterson's Wingfeather saga, and we're going to give it away to one of you lucky listeners. Here's how it works. We've posted on our Facebook and Instagram accounts asking what y'all's favorite fantasy story is that's not Lord of the Rings, Narnia, or Wingfeather. So go find that post from the Anslem Society and tell us your favorite, and we will randomly pick a winner to send the book to. So once again, find the Anslem Society's Facebook and Instagram accounts and post your favorite fantasy story, not Lord of the Rings, Narnia, or Wingfeather. Can't wait to see your comments. Walking a path along the roots of Pikes Peak, you take a fork in the road to the Anslem Society Digital Pub. Inside is a raucous conversation on the arts, faith, and whether our government is doing enough to address the threat of toothy cows. At a corner table by the fire are three people. One of them is reading through the Creaturepedia and arguing that maybe we should try to befriend the toothy cows. And that's me, Matthew Mellema, and welcome to Believe to See, a podcast of the Anslem Society Arts Guild. Here at Believe to See, we explore the relationship between faith, art, and storytelling. Our goal is to help you connect the great story, the great stories, and our own stories in order to understand what it means to live with a Christian imagination. And I'm joined here at the Fantasy Pub table today by Christina Brown. Christina, how are you doing today?
I'm great, thank you.
Now, as astute listeners have already discovered, we will be talking Wingfeather saga today, and we're very excited about it. Before we get going, seems like if you are one of the jewels of an era, you have three main occupations. You can either be the Throne Warden, the Monarch, or the Song Maiden. Which would you choose?
Me, I would absolutely be the Song Maiden. First of all, it's a lovely title. I just think that it's just beautiful. And second, I love songs.
Okay, yeah. Well, that's a good answer. My first thought reading through the books, because I'm the oldest of three boys, my thought is, well, obviously I need to be the Monarch. Oh no, what's going on here? But then the more I thought about it, I was like, that's a lot of responsibility. Same thing would go for the Throne Warden. I'm also not musical. Maybe I choose pass. Is that something? But anyway, we are talking. We will have the perfect person here to ask that exact question to. So, listeners, if you've been listening to Believe to See for any length of time, you'll know that we love fantasy stories, especially those geared toward capturing the imaginations of middle grade readers. We especially love those stories that their themes resonate with our Christian imaginations. So, obviously, we love Andrew Peterson's Wingfeather saga. And we're hardly alone in this. The 4 books in the Wingfeather saga have sold over 1 million copies. It's been turned into an animated series, which has been nominated for a 2023 Movie Guide Award. And starting this May, the books are coming out with all new paperback editions. And the man behind the Wingfeather saga and its legions of featherheads is joining us here today. Singer-songwriter, novelist, essayist, and perhaps most significantly, former keynote speaker at Anslem's Imagination Redeemed Conference. It's Andrew Peterson. Welcome to the table, Andrew. We're so thrilled to have you.
Hey, guys. So glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming. And I have been looking forward to this for a while. Like I mentioned, Andrew was one of the very first keynote speakers at our I think he was our first keynote speaker, right?
Yeah, our very first Imagination Redeemed Conference.
Yeah, so Anselm has had a very close connection with him, the rest of the folks over at the Rabbit Room for a long time. And obviously, I mean, this goes without saying because I'm hosting the show, but I'm a big fan of the Wingfeather saga too. So let's dive right into it, Andrew. So one of the questions that we have for you is about the Christian themes and the metaphors of the storytelling. Because like we said with the intro, we want to talk about how the great stories talk about the great story. And Christina, you were talking about this, especially with your questions on the themes.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you have a lot of great themes, and I love diving into authors and artists when just kind of getting some of the backstory. But I know you're also a singer-songwriter, a performer, and obviously I think when you're an artist with multiple mediums, they tend to cross-pollinate each other. So I was kind of wondering with your songwriting, how does your experience with song itself, and I know I read about this in Adorning the Dark, but your encounter with Rich Mullins and kind of encountering Jesus in that way, how does it play into the stories themselves, really play into the significance of song, having a song maiden, and kind of the magic of song and story to combat darkness?
Well, that's a big question.
It is. I'm really bad about starting with big questions. Apologies.
No, you're good. That's good. Let's just dive in, man. No, I think, I was drawn to, I liked the idea of giving songs a kind of power in the story, because that's how it is in our world, Mm-hmm. There is, I've thought of songs kind of like, as a kind of spell casting.
I love that.
In that, like in the Harry Potter books, like there's this whole idea that they practice saying the spells in a certain way. And if they get it right, then it works. And if they don't, it doesn't, and I think I kind of think songs can be that way. It's like you work really hard on getting the words right and the melody right. And then when you perform the song, you finally get the thing right, and sometimes the song is effective. It does a thing inside of other people. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the things that I really wanted to convey in the story is that that I don't have something that I'm very aware of when I'm doing a concert is that I cannot control what is going to happen on the inside of the people who are hearing these songs. And time and again, people get something different out of the song than you think they will, or than you wanted them to. and the cool thing about that to me is it means that we're not, the bad version of magic in fantasy books is this power thing. It's I want to control things and use things for my own ends and that kind of thing. But when you comes to the power that seems to inhabit songs and art, it's something that we are kind of the Holy Spirit is in charge, right? He's the one who gets to decide what happens. Our only thing is, the only thing I can do is be obedient to the call to go and stand on the stage and sing the song.
Yeah, yeah.
I can only get up there and do the thing, work really hard to make it as beautiful as I can, and then trust that it is going to do its own work. And so that's very different from spell casting. You know what I mean? Where it's I have a thing I'm trying to do. So I wanted to convey that idea in the books. Lily is this song maiden. Songs have a kind of power, but they cannot control it. They make themselves available to it. And then the maker sometimes allows this connection to happen.
Yeah.
Allows this beautiful moment to happen, which just is a reflection of my experience as a songwriter. I pray before most shows, Lord, the next 2 hours are yours. And we're just going to kind of be available to the leading of the Spirit and hope that something good and beautiful happens. But then the joy comes when you hear the stories later about, that it worked, because of our fumbling obedience to this calling. Then God sometimes lets us get a glimpse of what it is that he's doing through us and through the music and in the hearts of the other people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that you can really see that reflected in the books themselves, where at various points there's specific songs that the characters will sing, and depending on their motivations behind it, what's in their hearts, whether they're acting out of selflessness or selfishness, can have very big impacts on them. So it definitely seems like that is also in keeping what you were saying with almost the magic of music. And that leads me into my next question, which is, obviously you are a singer-songwriter / novelist. So how did you balance writing novels with balancing the songwriting? Were they using different parts of your brain? Were you doing them at the same time? Did they feed into each other? What was that creative process like?
Man, it's funny. You just reminded me of an anecdote that may be interesting to you. I don't know. I love Wendell Berry. His books are some of my favorite books in the world. He's one of the great poets and essayists and novelists.
Yeah.
And I had the honor of meeting him one time a few years ago, and was sitting down and with a few other friends who are way smarter than me, talking with Wendell Berry and his wife. And somebody asked him about his poetry. Do you write poetry every day? And he was like, I used to, but I don't anymore. And then he looked at me, and the first time he addressed me, he was like, well, Andrew, you said that you're a songwriter. and a novelist. Do you work on those things every day? And I kind of like got super scared. And I said, well, I tend to only work on one at a time because, they use different parts of my brain. And he didn't say the word hogwash, but he did. He did like kind of brush his hand aside and say, I think that's just a result of the way that we've kind of mechanized the way we think about our bodies and our brains.
Oh, I love that.
He said, I think you have one mind, and you're using that mind for different things, but you have one mind. You don't have two parts of your and I loved him kind of pushing back at that. It was this beautiful, humbling moment, and it led to a big conversation about all this stuff. But in light of that, I think I have. If it's true that I just have one mind, and that's like a faulty way of thinking of it, even though I do it all the time. I do think that the creative impulse comes from the same place, like trying to write songs and trying to write novels. It's this urge to put something in the world. It involves words. It's like that feeling of you have to abandon your agenda at the door, in a sense. I mean, you have an agenda. There's no way to really shake it. Everybody does when they sit down to write, even if that agenda is to not have an agenda. You have an agenda, right? And so, but there's this feeling of you are at the mercy of the work. You're trying to serve the work, like Madeleine L'Engle would say. And so for me, it was a combination of this real desire to put something good and beautiful into the world with a real desire to keep the lights on and pay the mortgage. And so it was like there was a lot of it's just true. Like I was like, man, I gotta do this thing. I want to make I gotta hit the road and play songs or put out these records or really want to make this book the kind of thing that I can publish, that kind of thing. So there was that was part of the reason I was crazy enough to try to write books at the same time as I was on the road and to try to do that while I was working on albums and stuff. So all that to say, sorry, I'm kind of rambling. I don't really know how to answer the question, except to say that there are a lot of differences between novel writing and songwriting. Huge differences. I think of songwriting as track and novel writing as cross country.
Oh, nice.
So one of them is about these short bursts of energy. The other one's about the long game.
I feel that way about like poetry versus like story, like long.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can sit down and even if it's a long poem, a lot of times you can read it in one sitting. But a novel is like this big unwieldy thing that you don't really know if it's any good until for a year. You work on this thing for a significant portion of your days on earth, and it's an act of faith because you're like, this could just be a giant stinker by the time it's done.
Absolutely.
And so you have to remind yourself pretty constantly that the book that you're writing is less important than what the writing of a book is doing for your character and who you are and like what you're learning about God and yourself in the process of writing the book. That way, if the book comes out and nobody cares about it, it still made something of you. While you were making something of the world, this thing that you were making has shaped you. So if you can remember that that's the far and away the more important thing that's happening when you're doing any creative work. I think it helps. So anyway, I will say though that the similarities are. There's a guy, John Hendricks. Do you guys know John Hendricks, the illustrator?
Yeah.
He's a great illustrator.
I follow him on Twitter. Great social media follow.
Nice.
Yes, it is. Yes, John Hendricks with an X. He's a great illustrator, dear friend, and he posted this graphic. Maybe 2 years ago of the creative arc, the arc of a creative endeavor. Do you remember this?
I do.
I wish I had it in front of me.
I remember thinking like, wow, that hits it square on the head. So yes, please do tell.
Yeah. And I don't have it in front of me, but it starts with the initiating vision, this bright dream that you have of the thing that you want to make, and that's the thing that gets you going. And then you begin to work on it, and then there's this deep dive into the pit of despair where you're just like, nothing I'm doing is great. And then, you fight your way out of the pit of despair. And then the thing that you finish isn't as good as the thing that initiated the vision. Mm-hmm. You're a little disappointed in it, but it's different than what you thought it would be, but you finished it, Mm-hmm. And I saw that and I was like, oh my goodness, he just completely visually nailed my experience. And then as it turns out, I was like, that's the thing that's the same, whether you're writing a novel or a song or a poem or a sermon, or whatever, that you're going to have this bright vision that gets you going. And then you remember that you're living in a fallen and broken world, in a fallen and broken body. Mm-hmm. Yep. And that the thing that you wanted to make, you're never going to get there. But that, it's like the echo of Eden that we all carry with us. Like we feel like we have a sense of what the new creation is going to be, or what the original creation was. And we're just, as long as, until Jesus comes and makes all things new, we're kind of living with the dissonance. Mm. And I think that as a creative person, you kind of have to get used to living with the dissonance.
Yeah, and then trust
the discontentment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Trust the Holy Spirit to sort of pull it all together, to complete it in the ways that he sees, before it all began.
Yeah, and those are the moments where it's like, it's the moments in like the Wingfeather saga that are my favorite moments are the moments where it's better than I am capable of doing. Mm. It's like the story, these little moments where it kind of peaked that I was like, well, that's, I didn't think that up. That just kind of happened, You receive it. You receive it as a gift. This is not because the writer is some great genius. It's just because, well, the Holy Spirit sometimes surprises us with our own work. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and one of the things me and Christina were talking about, because, as we're preparing for this interview, we're going like, oh, what are some themes we'd like to discuss with him from the books? And what came out was that, wow, there are a lot of very strong, Christian imaginative themes here. Some people would call your books, in a way, allegorical, right? Just like some people would call Chronicles of Narnia allegorical. And if I recall, C.S. Lewis pushed back on calling his books allegorical. I'm wondering, would you push back on that as well? And if so, how would you describe your books and their themes?
And is there like one major encompassing theme that you would say, yeah, no, this is kind of it? Or is it like, nope, this is a world, experience the world, experience the themes, just go for it?
Sure. Yeah. That's a good question. So I have a similar distaste for the word allegory. Yeah. It bothers me when people use that word because it's absolutely not that. Pilgrim's Progress is an allegory.
Yes.
This is not that, and Lewis, for those of you guys who listening at home who haven't heard him talk, people talk about what he said about this, was he imagined the Narnia books as a supposal story, was how he described it.
Yes.
So he said, suppose there was another world like Narnia. How might God interact with that world? So it's not like Aslan represents Jesus in the Narnia books. Aslan is Jesus in the Narnia books. Like it's not like I don't know. He's far more articulate than I am, obviously. But that's the thing that I think is so important to remember is that the Narnia books are not allegories. There are themes that are represented. There are beautiful. The truth kind of oozes out of that story, but it's not the same as an allegory. And if you're not sure what I mean, just Google it and dig in, because there's plenty of people who have talked about it better than I have. So, but yeah, my books are definitely not allegories. It's a fantasy novel, 4-book fantasy saga written by somebody who happens to be a Christian. And so I was really, if there's like a continuum where Narnia is at one end and Lord of the Rings is at the other, like I think these books fall more on the Lord of the Rings end of the books, not in terms of quality, but in terms of what I was trying to go for. I just wanted to build a world and see what would happen and let my Christian imagination come to bear on this world and see what would happen. And so, I definitely wasn't trying to, even the fact that there's a maker in the Wingfeather saga, it's not because that represents anything. It's just because, well, in this world, just like in our world, I think that somebody up there who's good and beautiful had to have made this place, or why all the goodness and beauty, And so, I thought I would take care of the religion question in the Wingfeather books by just making it so that everyone takes for granted that there is a maker, and that they have a sense that he is good, and so that way I could just like not have to worry about building some religious structure or whatever. But no, as far as the themes go, like I do think that there are themes of identity that show up. Sonship, daughterhood, or whatever you would call it, a sense of belovedness that we come to discover that we have with God, our good Father.
Yeah.
And so, other than that, it's like it's stuff that just shows up in the story. The story, I love it. So I'm just kind of rambling. Sorry again, but
You're fine.
Tolkien, like the Lord of the Rings is so great, and he was so resistant to all of this stuff. He was like, "I'm just writing a story. Stop. The orcs are not Nazis." And there's a lot of that pushback. But man, I think that I have thought about the Lord of the Rings so much in the last 5 years in America. Right. There have been so many lessons that I've called to mind when I've been talking to friends. I was like, this thing is driving me crazy. It's kind of like, it's kind of like Faramir and the thing that Faramir says in the thing. And so there's all these moments where, because Tolkien wasn't trying to force a theme into his books, it allows the books to kind of bubble over with themes, so that, I think that's a beautiful result of that. So I will tell you that I don't think you can ideally start a book with a theme in mind. I think your better option is to start a book, and then in the first draft you see what themes emerge.
Yeah.
And then when you go back to do the edit, you augment. You're kind of like, oh, now I know what the themes of the story are, and I can shape the story a little bit around what these themes are that are showing up. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And that is such an interesting question, because one of the, I'm sure this happens with all of your writer friends as well, where one of the enduring questions we have is like, okay, do we start with outlining, getting all of it, or do we just sort of write and see where the story takes us? And that's especially important with regards to themes. So when you were starting writing, you mentioned you didn't have any clear themes, and then you'd go back and add. But did you have sort of a guiding, a North Star in terms of either the plot or the story or the themes that did get you going?
Yeah, I mean, there was a story that I heard. So you guys remember a Prairie Home Companion, the Garrison Keillor radio show? So there was a segment on that show called Tales from Lake Wobegon. So he would make up these stories every week. Remember that? And I used to, back before iPhones and podcasts, when I would drive around America doing concerts, we had these box sets of the cassettes, of the Tales from Lake Wobegon. We'd pop them in the van's tape player and listen for hours. Yeah, man. And so one of those stories was about a family in Lake Wobegon, this fictional town in Minnesota. And there was a single mom who lived in the town. Nobody knew who the father of her son was. It was just this drifter that came through town, and they had, made some bad decisions, and then the guy drifted away, and then she was raising this little boy, and who didn't know who his dad was. And then one day somebody shows up in Lake Wobegon and says, "Do you know this man?" And she was like, "Well, I met him 12 years ago. He came through town and he left again." And he tells her that man was the heir to the throne of Scotland. And we're not ready to tell everyone yet, but we're pretty sure that your son is the last remaining heir to the throne of Scotland. And we can't tell. We're not ready to announce it yet. But then in the Lake Wobegon story, it changes the way she moves through the town, because she used to be looked down on, and her son used to be looked down on. But now, because he knew that he was royalty, he could hold his head high. He just couldn't tell anybody. And I loved that story so much. It was such a beautiful story. And I'm not going to tell you how it ends in case you want to go find it. But that was the spark of the idea. Because as a Christian, it mirrored my own stories, that I grew up in a little town. I'm not. My dad was a pastor. It was it wasn't like I didn't know who my parents were, but I didn't know who my heavenly Father was. And I just kind of thought of myself as this scumbag, kind of rotten kid who couldn't do right no matter how hard he tried, didn't like himself. And then one day I was told that I was, because of Christ, God's beloved. And it changed everything. And I realized that he loved me and that I was, and I wanted to love him back, and that it gave me a calling and a purpose. And I wanted everyone to know that they were also beloved. And so, so that was the spark of the idea. It was like that idea that who I am, who the Lord says I am, trumps who anybody else says I am, especially the enemy of my heart.
Right.
And so that was the beginning of the idea. I was like, what if there was a kid who lived in a town who thought he was kind of a waste of space, and then one day he found out that his father was a king. Yeah. How would that change him?
I love
and
that.
So that was the beginning of the story. And almost everything that happened after that was a surprise. You know, I had intimations of Kalmar's heartbreaking story, but the very end of the Wingfeather saga, I didn't realize what was going to happen until I got there.
Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, that's a beautiful theme to begin on, and it's one that I think we just all have to understand as Christians. Like, where is that identity? Where does it sit? You know.
And related to that, because I love that you mentioned that, because just you describing that makes me go back through the series. It's like, oh, like when all the Igby kids are going off to school, their mom says, hey, remember who you are. Like just that. And just seeing the way the mom, and even in book 1, before we know what's going on, the way she carries herself is different than we'd expect from someone on the outside of town in a little cottage. But there's also the theme related to this of names. And okay, listeners, I should have given a formal spoiler alert at the beginning, but y'all get the picture by now. I'm going to give spoilers, okay?
Careful.
Oh, you don't think I should?
I think you get a little couple lines here.
Okay, you're right. Okay, you're right. Listeners, you're very lucky that you have Christina here. So I will not give blatant spoilers, but the very start of the books, like the preface talks about the main villain, Nag the Nameless. And you almost play it off as like a joke. He's nameless and his name is Nag. And, it just seems like basically a joke at the beginning. But, again, not giving too much away, the fact that he is nameless turns out to be one of the key facts at the very end. So I just was hoping you could talk about that theme of names and how it came full circle. Like this little joke at the beginning turns out to be the core thing at the very end.
Yeah, and it's still related to like the belovedness of Jenner. It pulls together, coalesces in a really beautiful way.
Thank you. The naming thing is tied in very much to that same thing. There's the verse in Revelation where it talks about the white stone on which our new name is written.
Oh, that's one of my favorite passages. Oh, it hits me.
I love that idea. Yeah. That we have this name that only God knows, and it's just such a beautiful thought. It kind of wakes my heart up when I just think about it. But George MacDonald was big on names and identity and the love of the Father. Like that seems to be like his main. I've heard people say that every preacher only preaches this one sermon.
I've heard that too.
It's like I think every songwriter kind of has one song that they keep coming back to. And
that's
I'm
a good
kind
question.
of the same way. Like
I was gonna say, kind of want to know yours now, but.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say that, like, if you listen to my song, people have emailed me saying that, they see a lot of themes from my songs that show up in the Wingfeather saga. I was like, oh, guilty. Yep, that's probably because I'm harping on the same stuff all the time.
Wendell Berry, he's got it right.
Yeah. And so it's true. One mind. So anyway, I think the Nag the Nameless thing was that a joke, like you said in the beginning. When I was beginning the world building process, I was kind of just going, oh, once upon a time there was this and there was that. And a lot of that stuff, like Pete the Sock Man, to me, it was just funny that there was a guy in town who wore socks. It was just a non sequitur. But then when you begin to think about it, you're like, well, if I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but when you're building a fantasy world, you have to do quote unquote research. Just like if you were writing historical fiction, you'd have to figure out, okay, what did people eat in the Civil War era in America, in the 1800s. And in the fantasy, it feels like when you first start out, well, I'm the guy that gets to make all this stuff up. I'll just make it up as you go. But then you keep running into problems. Like, Like, I don't know what kind of money they use, or I don't know how much technology exists in this world, or what is the political system like. You're like, I got to know this stuff, because that's the kind of dirt under your fingernails that makes the world feel real. It's like, you want it to feel like this place actually exists. Or I did anyway. And in the way that, a more cartoony way, but Tolkien, like, part of the charm of The Lord of the Rings is that you close that book and you feel like you've just read history, right?
Yeah.
And that the spell that gets cast in that is part of the delight of Middle Earth. And so I was trying to do something similar. And so after Nag the Nameless popped into my head, I was like, oh, that would be funny. I was like, well, wait, why would he invade Anira? Why? What is his end game? What is he after? Why is his name Nag the Nameless? So I had all these documents on my computer where I just was like, the history of Nag the Nameless, and I would just kind of make up stuff. So I had, histories and all that kind of business written out. So that was one of the big reveals in book 4 that I couldn't wait to get to. I was like, I know why he's called Nag the Nameless, and it's not just a joke. And to have to wait almost 10 years to get to reveal this thing was very satisfying. It was like super fun to get to tell people.
Nice.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And just so you know, we are mostly writers here who host this show, and I'm working on my own fantasy projects. So
middle grade as well.
Middle grade as well. And as our other hosts know too painfully well, I love world building. So you cannot go too far into the weeds for me, Andrew. Like I want to follow you deep into the weeds of the world building. And one of those ways is with the Fangs of Dang, which I find fascinating for so many reasons. But one of them, and I'll go back to the talk you gave at the Anselm event back in the day, where you were talking about how when you were growing up, you read a lot of fantasy novels, and a lot of them, looking back, you're like, okay, these might not exactly be great literature stuff, but they still formed your imagination in important ways, and how the Fangs of Dang, these sort of terrifying snake-man hybrid creatures, came from those books, but then you were able to use them as serious characters that pack really important symbolical, metaphorical meaning. So can you talk about how you're able to use even kind of these, not high-quality literature that you consumed and use it to make high-quality stuff?
Well, thank you for suggesting that this is high-quality stuff. I'm very grateful. I don't know if that's true. I hope it is. Anyway, I think in the talk that I gave at Anselm, which was based on this chapter that ended up in Adorning the Dark, that idea that, your imagination my imagination at least, was very hungry for fantasy when I was a kid. And, even if they were weeds and not vegetables it was candy that I was eating, not good, healthy food. I've kind of lost my taste for candy now. And so, but at the time, that's all, I was just gobbling stuff up. But the thing is, like, all of that stuff goes into the leaf mold of the mind. Yeah. I think that was a Tolkien phrase. And so, it's not surprising that stuff that is kind of throwaway ends up getting redeemed and turned into something beautiful. It reminds me, I'm a gardener, and so the compost pile is an important thing. It's like all the stuff you throw away ends up being the thing that's feeding the good stuff, right? And so that was kind of how it was. Like, that's why I think it's okay to let a kid just kind of go bonkers and read whatever he or she wants, because it's all feeding. Okay, so caveat, I don't mean anything that they want, but there's a point at which you kind of go, if you can cultivate a love of reading, they'll refine that. They'll refine their taste as they get older. So it's like, you don't have to make your kids read,
The Silmarillion.
Dickens. You can let you can let them read ghost stories or Captain Underpants.
Yeah,
whatever.
was it Goosebumps? Goosebumps.
I wasn't allowed to read Goosebumps growing up, Christy. I don't know about your house, but
yeah. My son gobbled up Goosebumps to the point where we were kind of feeling like, I don't know if this is good for him. Does he need or whatever? And so but there's as long as the trick is to teach the kid, like, if you keep showing them what is good, then they're gonna learn they're going to start choosing the vegetables for themselves. And if they're not, then that's when you intervene. But anyway, I forgot what the original question was.
Fangs of Dang.
What were we talking about?
Right, Matt?
Yes, the Fangs of Dang from the paperback, from the pulp fantasy novels to your books.
So what I was talking about was the composting. There's this documentary called Taste and See, which this guy it doesn't matter. Anyway, it's a great documentary about food and faith, and there's this Jewish farming community in like New England somewhere, maybe upstate New York, and it's this really beautiful community of people who are living off the land, and they're kind of like learning to take care of creation. But they're, it's a very Jewish thing. The name of it is Adamah, I think, which is, the Hebrew word for earth, which was where we get Adam from. Anyway, there's a sign in the documentary. It shows that they have a sign over the compost heap that says, "The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone."
I love that.
And I love that so much. It's just like such a beautiful spiritual truth. And to think that Jesus was what was cast off and thrown away, and ended up being the one who became the cornerstone, who out of which sprang all life and goodness, is such a beautiful thought. That on a compost heap of trash, that there was this verse. Anyway, I think that that's just so wonderfully subversive that the Lord would make the world this way. But I think that he can use, the other people's creative works in the same way. At least he did for me. So I still have the Dragonlance books sitting on my shelf up there, and they're still packed with nostalgia. When I open those books, I smell them, and I remember being 13 years old, and I just kind of love it. So anyway,
that's awesome.
No, I totally agree with you. I just notice in my storytelling now, I'll have be developing plot lines or heroes oh my gosh, this is Power Rangers. What's going on here? Hopefully, I'm doing more with it than that. But yeah, even if it's candy, it can still get the creativity going. I absolutely love that. One of the other things, again, this is apparent right from the start of book one, is that these books are really funny. Again, the preface is really funny. There's lots of jokes in it, and that continues throughout the 4 books. So my question for you is, why did you decide to make these books so funny? Because it's very easy to imagine a more straight-laced version of these stories, but why did you decide to keep the fun and the funny in it?
Yeah, there's a great mix.
Thank you. I think it's just because I'm a big dork. I just thought stuff was funny, and it was a little bit easier of a pill to swallow to tell my friends that I was working on a fantasy novel. If I was kind of well, it's for kids, it's kind of goofy and kind of whatever, but it's also kind of serious. But I loved The Princess Bride when I was a kid. I thought it was delightful. I think the Narnia books have a fair bit of humor in them. I love. In the Harry Potter books, how there's this real kind of fun, cartoony, Dumbledore is a pretty goofy name.
Yeah.
Hogwarts is a really silly name. But when you get to the end of those books and it's the Battle of Hogwarts, you've forgotten how silly it is because what's at stake is so huge.
I've totally
and
thought
I just
about
kind
that.
of love I love the way those things kind of rub up against each other. And so I wanted to do kind of the same, and the footnotes, which are really.
I almost commented on the footnotes. Those cracked me up.
Thanks. It was so fun to do the footnotes. But there's a book called Jonathan Strange and Mr.
Hey,
Norrell,
I was good.
by Susanna Clark.
Yeah.
Which I read while I was working on the first draft of that book.
Oh, really? Okay.
Her footnotes go on for pages. I loved her footnotes in that book. You'd turn there'd be one sentence of regular sized font, and then underneath it would be all footnote, and then you turn the page, it would keep going. So I just thought that it was delightful, and it was a clever way to build the world and make the world feel like a real place.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
I am so thrilled that you mentioned Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I was actually about to, as you were talking, I was ooh, I'm going to bring up Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. And listeners to the pod know I do that all the time because I love it so much. And like you said, a big part is the footnotes because they create this it's sort of an organic world, right? She'll be citing, fables and tales within her fantasy world, or, oh, here's a magical text from here. And I think, and that's one of the things I appreciate about your works too, is the world feels lived in, thought out. It does not surprise me at all that you have separate documents like concerning the biology of toothy cows. What do you feel that adds to, let's picture a typical, middle grade reader, 12, 13-year-old, they love books, they love stories, they get into your stories. What do you think that adds to them seeing oh my gosh, the author has a section on toothy cows?
Yeah, and also what interest is that you think to middle grade readers versus adults? Because I think sometimes adults appreciate footnotes more, but these footnotes are so interesting. I could totally see some kids being like, oh, this is, maybe oldest children. I think oldest children in that birth order. Well, what is this? What is this order? Let me see what this, what does this say? But yeah, how do you think
funny.
Yeah, how do you think the young readers approach those?
Yeah, I don't really know. That's a good question. I don't know. I don't hear from young readers so much about the footnotes, except for Pembroke's Creaturepedia.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which that's one that kind of keeps getting mentioned, and that's an actual book that the kids can read and add their stuff to. And we're about to publish. I just finished the final draft not long ago of A Ranger's Guide to Glipwood Forest.
Oh, fun. Super fun.
Either at the end of this year or the beginning of next year, which was a really fun, it's the history of the original Rangers Guild.
Cool.
An epic before our books, the Wingfeather books. So it's about the first people to try to tame Glipwood Forest. And it was really fun. So in my mind, it's like a fun excuse to continue to flesh out the world and make it continue to cast that spell, to kind of make it feel like there are possibilities around the corner, which was one of the goals with the animated series. One of the beautiful things about the choice that Chris Wall and Keith Lango, the head of animation, they really wanted to convey this sense of handcrafted, hand painted, beautiful backgrounds that weren't photorealistic. Like when you go see a Pixar movie, it's like they don't leave anything to the imagination. It's like it's amazing. It's like the imagination of the filmmakers is on the screen.
Yeah.
But we wanted to create something that would kind of meet the viewer halfway and say, hey, engage your imagination. Like this is kind of the shape of a tree, but I'm going to leave it to your imagination to guess what's around that corner or what's deeper into the woods or whatever.
So do you feel was that partly related to you want the readers to read first and then watch, or do you want the watch and then read? That's a big debate.
Oh man, I would, I would say for sure read and then watch.
Okay, so they have an idea already when they go into this. Okay,
yes.
Okay. Because when you said some of it's left out, I could totally see you saying, yes, but I want you to world build as you're watching, which is not normally, like you said, how people do it. Pixar creators, they everything, which is gorgeous, like you said. But yeah, I kind of wondered, well, is there a sequence that you're kind of going for?
Well, there's this great principle that I learned from Andrew Stanton in an essay he wrote. Andrew Stanton is the Pixar guy who wrote Finding Nemo and several other great ones. And you can find it online. It's like his keynote at some kind of conference, and it's a bunch of principles on storytelling. But one of them is the idea of 2 + 2, not 4, which I think is so good. It's something that I stole for my songwriting and also my concerts. Is the idea that the audience wants to work for their entertainment, but not too hard. So it's kind of like you don't want the storyteller to tell you everything, because when you get a joke, right, if you have to explain the joke, it's not funny. What the laughter comes when you make the connection in your mind and you go, aha, I see, right? And so when you're telling a story, you don't want to feed them everything. You want to trust that the audience is going to be smart enough to keep up with some things. And part of the delight we experience is when we make those connections on our own without being fed. You feel dumb not dumb. I get frustrated when I'm watching a movie and I kind of want to be like, why did you have to say that? We knew that already because you showed us, right? Yeah. And so that sense, but if you're too obtuse, if you're being really, really hard to figure out, then the audience is going to check out too, because they're like, I don't even know what's going on. So you got to find that balance of giving them just enough to keep engaged. And so that's one of the things I love about the look of the animated series is that there's something subconscious that's happening when you're seeing a background painting that's kind of abstracted.
Yeah.
Because your brain is engaged with filling in those blanks and completing that circle.
Yeah.
And so yeah, but we were talking about footnotes and stuff, and I like the idea that we're constantly hinting to the reader that if you could get inside the screen and look around the corner, you'd find another story.
Yeah.
You'd find something through here, and there would be more to explore. I feel
like it's a great way for kids to build a love of history too, which I'm huge on. Because even teaching my son, I'm like, he's like, why did I do history? I'm like, well, because it's really interesting. I promise.
Yeah, sure.
You will see yourself in history. Yeah. So I kind of love that you did that, even to give the kids options to like, well, what is the history of this? What kind of gives them that like extra layer of depth to want to kind of explore their own world, at least even unconsciously, like not like they would consciously think, oh, history is cool now,
Sure.
But,
and
it's kind of like in. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say it's like in Lord of the Rings when Frodo and Sam when the company happens upon the trolls in the woods.
Yep.
And if you don't know the Hobbit, then it's kind of like, oh, cool, there's stone trolls. There must be a story here. But if you do know the history and they see it, you feel like you're like getting this amazing connection.
Yep.
Yeah, that is so true.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head when you're talking about like there are these hints to a larger world, right? It's like cracking a door open. It's like, oh, there's a whole other world on the other side of that door. And that's something that obviously Lord of the Rings does a fantastic job on. They'll, Frodo and Sam will be walking. There's an aside to like some ruins that they pass. And you realize, oh, there's a whole, epochs of stories happening there. And again, I think that's something that you're able to do with your world building as well. And let's talk a little bit about the world building because, again, listeners, I'm sorry. I just love this stuff, okay? I just love it.
Everyone knows Matt and his world building. It's okay. It's all right.
One of the fun things with this, like you mentioned, is it's tricky to weave it organically into a story because I think a lot of writers have a simple, it's like, I want to dump all the information I have on the reader right away. But like you said, you need to give them the 2 + 2, let them connect it. And that leads me, Andrew, to a question I have had for years, ever since I first read your book. Let me put my cards on the table here. I am the oldest of 3 siblings. So when you were talking about how the throne would go down for the kings and queens of an era, and I found out that I, as the oldest, would be the throne warden, and my younger brother, Jeremy, would be the king. I was like, what? Like, just offend, like 10-year-old me is just like offended to his core. So can we talk a little bit about why you decided on that succession plan and how you built that out? Because the 10-year-old me is just offended that Jeremy would be the king and not me. But objectively, I realized that created a lot of cool, gave you a lot of cool symbolic, gave you a lot of cool storytelling possibilities. So tell us about the Anirian succession plan.
Yeah.
You also had a question about the death of the
don't worry,
elder.
that's coming too.
Coming. Okay, all right.
Okay, so I haven't worked out all of the like what ifs, like all the contingency plans. I get emails from young readers sometimes. It's like, what if there are only 2 kids?
That would have been if I would have been 12 when these books came out. That would be me.
Yeah. It has happened plenty. But the way that I've to the extent that I've figured it out, there's the throne warden, followed by the high king or high queen, followed by the song maiden or song master. So it could be a boy or a girl. And then after that, everybody is called a lore wain. So it would be they're the keepers of the history and the lore. So it's not like you're, as far as the thags go, the 3 honored and great subjects, word, song, and form. Like I'm terrible at math, and so I was just like, I want to make a world where math don't matter, which is all fine and good until it's like you realize that we need to build bridges and buildings and castles, and it's like, I guess somebody out there's got to be good at math. So anyway, I just what was I saying? Oh, I don't remember where the idea came from. Like I remember, I just thought that would be a fun twist if Janner thought this was going to happen. Thematically, though, it ended up being wonderful because what I didn't realize until I got to book 4, there's a scene, I don't want to spoil it, but where the kids go down into the Fane of Fire, and And Kalmar gets to walk with the Maker, and Janner isn't allowed to come. He has to kind of sit outside and wonder what's happening in there because he's not the king. And in that moment, kind of the internal monologue that Janner experiences, I realized, oh my goodness, Janner's central flaw is selfishness. He's just a selfish dude. And I didn't know that in book 1, right? I couldn't have predicted that, this is going to be a story about a boy who whatever. But as I got to know his character and I began to see, the decisions that he would make, his internal struggle, it tended to be the selfishness. And so the perfect way for him to learn how to be unselfish was for him to be not the king, not the center of attention, but to learn that service was more important than leading.
Yeah.
Anyway, all that to say, I was very thankful for that. That's the way that it all kind of broke down. But that's the idea behind the thing. I think we don't like the fact that the Lord gives us what we need. He's going to give us what we want. He's not going to give us what we want until what we want and what we need are the same thing.
Yeah.
Or he'll give us what we want as a way of teaching us that it isn't what we need. And so I think that was a case. Yeah, exactly. So being able to intuit, probably because Janner's a lot like me, that I've got my own selfishness that I've got to reckon with, there was some subconscious thing at play whenever it came time for the reveal. And I was like, oh yeah, he's going to have to learn that he's got to serve his brother.
Yeah.
Anyway, the way that played out was a surprise to me.
I love that. And as an oldest child, it's so funny. No. See, I'm different.
Oh my.
I actually resonated. I was like, this is so cool. Like, I'd be down for this. However, when it did come to that point where Kalmar got to walk with the Maker, and I imagined myself not being that person, I was so like, nope, couldn't do that.
Obviously, you have struck a chord with all of us oldest children.
Exactly.
So you are to be commended for that.
That's so funny. And I'm a second. My older brother and I there are 4 of us, and I'm one of the middle ones.
So how did he feel about this plan of you being king?
Oh man, I don't know. That we'll probably be in counseling for years over this. But no, there is. Yeah, he was a protector. My older brother. I thought of him as a protector.
Yeah, and I thought of myself that way, which I think is my siblings didn't like me thinking of them that way, but I mean, like me thinking of myself that way. But I did, so I was cool with that. Sorry, keep going.
Sure. Yeah. I get it. No, I was just going to say that there's all kinds of subconscious stuff that comes out when you're writing a story or a song, So
yeah, absolutely.
You got to kind of go with it and just admit that this was in you.
Yeah.
Figure out what it means.
Yeah,
well, before we close, I know we're running out of time. I wanted to ask if there's any parent out there, because I'm sure most of the people who come to you are probably pretty enthusiastic, but I am sure there are also some people who are perhaps not. So if you were to be minding your business and this pesky parent came up and said, yeah, so I'm not sure I really love you. Why should my children read your books? Like, what would you say?
The hostile parent.
The hostile parent.
Oh man, that's funny. I would probably say, don't read my books. Read the Narnia books. Read the Lord of the Rings. Read a bunch of other stuff. I'm fine if somebody doesn't want to read my books. But I don't know. I think maybe I would say, and this is a big part of the conversation with the animated series. We just really wanted to put something out into the world that demonstrated that we took the trust that the parents had in us very seriously.
Yeah,
I love that.
And so I remember, you got to be, as much as I talked about letting your kid read whatever he wants, there were times where I happened upon a book that Aiden had checked out at school at the library, and I'd kind of skimmed ahead and been like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is in a children's book. And I would, divert his attention away from that. So I'm very careful. I was very careful with what my kids were exposed to, mainly because I just wanted them to have a real good, strong sense of what was true and what was beautiful and what was good, so that they'd have something to compare it with later when they encountered other media. So for me to write a story that does go to dangerous and dark places, it isn't all funny. Like there's some really heavy stuff in these stories.
Yeah.
But it's never taken lightly. Like, and we were prepared for it with the Wingfeather saga animated series. Like by the end of it, where there are fangs that are getting killed and there's like real battles that you're seeing on screen, you feel that differently when you're watching it than when you're reading it. And we were careful with it. We were like, we need to make sure that we're doing this intentionally. So I think that's what I would tell a mom. I was like, you may not like my books, but don't not like them because you think that I don't care. Because I do.
Yeah.
No, and absolutely. So, and that's one of the things that stuck out to me reading through the books is you can tell the intentionality there. You can tell the care put in to like steward the middle grade imaginations. I really appreciate that. And
yeah,
Andrew,
I like that. Steward the middle grade imagination. That's such an important and beautiful phrase. You want that as a parent looking into a book for your children.
Yes. Yeah. So Andrew, we are running out of time, unfortunately. But for folks who want to get into the series, either the TV show, the books, where can we find you? Where can we see what's going on? What's next on deck for you?
Yeah. So if you just go to andrew-peterson.com or just Google Andrew Peterson, there's another guy who writes spy thrillers like Jack Reacher type stuff named Andrew Peterson. So don't go there. We've emailed back and forth. He's a nice guy, but the books are very different. Or angel.com. If you go to angel.com or download the app, you can watch the show there. And we tried really hard to make it so that if you had never read the books, you could come in cold and watch the show and then read the books, and there would still be surprises. There would be like a lot of depth. So they complement each other really well. That's what I would. And we're working hard on season 2 right now.
Great.
Deep into season 2, we have some really fun reveals that we're going to make later about some of the actors that are on board.
Nice.
That I wish I could tell you who they were, but they're really cool. Some really fun people that are doing it. And so that's happening. About to go on tour in the UK in a couple weeks, and just kind of the same old. Playing shows, writing books, tending my garden.
Nice.
I'm a grandpa. That's the biggest thing.
Okay.
My oldest son and his wife had their first baby about 2 months ago. So
precious.
I'm kind of living the dream right now. I'm the crusty old grandpa that writes fantasy novels.
You're Poto now.
You're Poto. I love that.
Man, I'll take it all day. Thank you guys. It's so good to talk to you guys.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us here. And
Likewise.
Listeners, as you can probably tell, things are winding down at the Anslem Society Digital Pub. The fire is down to embers, the customers are trundling home, and you've polished off your final glass. Once again, Believe to See is a podcast of the Anslem Society Arts Guild. We have maybe 30 or so seconds to spare. Why not rate and review our show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts? Thank you again so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.